Hi students, in the previous chapters we've learnt about lenses, we've learnt about mirrors. In this chapter, we are going to learn about our very own human eye. You see, we see so many sceneries around us, we see so many colors. We see green grass, we see bluish water, we see brown branches of trees. All this is possible only because of the human eye. Even inside our house, we see yellow fire, colored walls, furniture. We are able to see all of this only because of the human eye. In this chapter, we will learn exactly how the human eye works. Understood? We will learn in detail how it forms an image and how that image is studied by the brain. The human eye. So as I said, it is the human eye that allows us to see color. We are able to perceive the world around us because of the human eye. These sceneries, these clouds, the sky is all visible to us because of the human eye. So, how does the human eye form an image? How does it, allow us to see all the world around us? This is how the human eye looks from inside. Understood? So basically, if you took a cross section of the human eye, this is what you would see. Light enters the human eye from the left, like this. The left part of the human eye, through which light first enters, is called the cornea. So this portion here, this exterior portion is the cornea. Once the light passes through the cornea, it enters a lens-like mass, which is called the eye lens. This eye lens is very similar to the lenses that we studied in the previous chapter. It refracts light, just like other lenses. This lens, as you can see, is a convex lens, so it converges light. So if two parallel beams of light are falling on this convex lens, they get converged like this because of this convex lens. The cornea also helps in refracting light. So the cornea and the lens, both of them converge the rays that enter the eye. We already know that when rays converge and meet, an image is formed, isn't it? So the image of whatever comes into the eye is formed here behind the eye at a portion called the retina. Understood? So light enters from the left, it gets refracted because of the lens and the cornea, and an image is formed at the back portion of the eye called the retina. So the retina is the portion of the eye where the image is formed. Retina is light sensitive. Retina actually consists of some light sensitive cells. So it functions like a screen. So it is the light sensitive screen where the image is formed. The image formed by the eye lens is inverted and real. Understood? So you must remember the properties of the image. It is always inverted and real because the rays actually meet at the retina, isn't it? A real image is formed when the rays that are refracted from a lens actually meet. So this is how the image formation in the eye takes place. Now what happens after this? How do we see an object, after the image has been formed? Once the image has been formed, the light sensitive cells in the retina generate some electrical signals. These electrical signals are transmitted to the brain by a nerve called the optic nerve. You can see this bulging portion here that's coming out of the eyeball. This portion is the optic nerve. This nerve carries the electrical impulses from the retina to the brain. The brain then interprets these electrical signals and tells us what we are seeing. So isn't that fascinating? I'll repeat the seeing process to you once again. Light enters from the left portion of the eye. It gets refracted by the cornea and the eye lens, and this light converges and forms an inverted and real image at the retina, the back portion of the eye. The retina consists of light sensitive cells which generate electrical impulses which are carried by the optic nerve to the brain. The brain interprets these electrical signals and then it helps us to see. So basically the eye is just a mechanical instrument. It just forms the image, It's our brain which actually does the seeing. So these were some parts of the eye. Note, there is one interesting thing here, however, that you must remember. This interesting thing is that the image is always formed on the retina. You see, whenever we use an ordinary convex lens in real life, there is the object distance, there is the image distance, and there is the focal length, isn't it? Generally, the focal length of a convex lens is constant. As we vary the object distance, the image distance keeps on varying. So for example, if the object is brought near the lens, the image distance changes. In the case of the eye, however, the image distance is constant because the image is always formed on the retina. Understood? The focal length of the eye lens varies. So depending on where the object is placed, the focal length of the eye lens varies in such a way that the image is always formed on the retina. We had learned that 1 by v minus 1 by u equal to 1 by f, where v is the image distance, u is the object distance, and f is the focal length. In the case of the eye lens, f varies and u varies. V, the image distance, is constant. So for example, this is an object placed in front of the eye. As you bring the object closer and closer, the focal length keeps on decreasing. That is, the eye lens keeps on getting thicker and thicker in such a way that the image is formed at the retina. When the object is far away, the rays from the object travel a long distance before reaching the eye lens, isn't it? So it is easy for the eye lens to converge those rays. When the object, however, comes very near the eye lens, in that case, the rays are very diverging. The eye lens has to be of a very strong power to converge the rays at the retina only. Understood? When the object is far away, the eye lens can easily converge the rays. But when the object is nearby, then the eye lens must have very high thickness. It must have very high power and very less focal length so that it can converge the rays at the retina. It has been found out that the eye lens can converge the rays at the retina up to a distance of 25 centimeters. If an object is closer than 25 centimeters, then the eye lens cannot converge the rays at the retina. A normal eye lens, that is. It can converge the rays at a distance greater than that of the retina. The image distance will become greater than the distance between the eye lens and the retina. So the minimum distance of clear vision is 25 centimeters for a normal eye. You must remember this. This point is called the near point. Understood? So the near point represents the minimum distance at which you can see something clearly. If an object is nearer than 25 centimeters, its clarity decreases. The far point is another point that we talk about. The far point is the point, is the maximum distance that the eye can see clearly. This far point is infinity for the normal eye. If rays come from infinity, in that case, the focal length of the eye lens gets adjusted in such a way that the rays converge at the retina. So the far point is infinity. In that case, the focal length of the eye lens becomes equal to the image distance, the distance between the lens and the retina, isn't it? After all, if rays are coming from infinity, they will converge at the focus of the convex lens. So the retina in that case becomes the focus of the convex lens. Understood? So this is about near point and far point. The crux of what I have told you right now is that the eye lens, the focal length of the eye lens varies in such a way that the image is always formed at the retina. Now this behavior of the eye lens, the ability of the eye lens to adjust its focal length so that the image is always formed on the retina, is called power of accommodation. So if anyone asks you what is the power of accommodation of the eye, you can say that the ability of the eye lens to change its focal length in such a way that the image is always formed on the retina. That is the power of accommodation. Understood? There you go. Now that we've looked at some important parts of the eye and we've understood how it functions, let's look at some more parts of the eye which we haven't yet studied. An important part of the eye is cornea, which we have studied. It is the external layer, next to the eye lens, which helps in refracting the light that enters the eye. We have studied about the eye lens. It refracts the light and converges it on the retina. The ciliary muscles are some other important parts of the eye. The ciliary muscles are muscles located at the top of the eye lens and at the bottom of the eye lens. they contract and expand to change the focal length of the eye lens. We just learnt that the eye lens has the power of accommodation. Its focal length can increase or decrease to make sure that the image is formed on the retina. The ciliary muscles are those muscles which change the focal length of the eye. They compress the eyeball or they expand and push it up and stretch it to increase or decrease its focal length. So this is the function of ciliary muscles. Another important part of the eye is the pupil. The pupil is an opening that is present just in front of the eye lens. The pupil regulates the amount of light that enters the eye. You see, if you enter a dark room, then not enough light enters the eye to form an image, isn't it? So the pupil opens very wide to allow a very large amount of light to enter the eye. If, however, you're standing in the sun, then there is a lot of light, isn't it? And a very small amount of light is enough to form the image. So the pupil decreases or increases the amount of light entering the eye so that the image is clearly seen. The opening and closing of the pupil is controlled by a muscular diaphragm called the iris. Understood? Just as the ciliary muscles, control the compression and stretching of the eye lens, the iris controls the opening and closing of the pupil. So the iris is basically a muscular diaphragm, basically a muscular membrane, which makes the pupil open and which makes the pupil close. Don't get confused by the word diaphragm. It simply means a membrane, understood, that can be stretched. So you can see how the pupil, helps more light and less light enter the eye. Here you can see that there is abundant light, isn't it? In such light, the pupil is small, so that a small amount of light can enter the eye, because only a small amount of light is sufficient to form the image. On the other hand, when it gets darker, the pupil becomes large. As you can see, now a large amount of light can enter the eye, isn't it? That is because the light around the eye in darkness is not sufficient to form the image. So the pupil allows more light to enter so that a correct image can be formed. That is the reason it is difficult to see clearly in a dark room initially, but easier after some time. You see, when you enter a dark room, initially you can't see anything. But after some time, slowly you can start seeing some things, the outlines of a table or the outlines of your computer. That is because initially when you enter the dark room, the pupil is small, isn't it? Because it is used to getting a lot of light. It takes some time to open up and allow more light to enter. So that is why after some time the pupil opens up and it allows more and more light to enter. Understood? So that is the reason it takes some time to get accustomed, to the objects in a dark room. You start seeing them after some time because the pupil takes some time in opening. It cannot open and close suddenly. That is also, the reason why you, feel uncomfortable when light is suddenly switched on in a dark room. When you suddenly switch on the light in a dark room, what happens is, in the dark room, the pupil is already, quite open. So when the light is switched on, a very large amount of light enters the eye. So that causes all those flashy feelings. Then after some time, the pupil contracts. It becomes smaller so that less amount of light can enter the eye. And then you become comfortable in bright light. There you go. There are some more parts of the eye. One part of the eye we haven't discussed till yet is aqueous humor. The aqueous humor is a fluid that is present between the cornea and the eye lens. So it is present here on the left side of the eye lens, this one. Understood? The advantage of this fluid is that it protects the eye lens against dust. So it keeps the eye lens clean. See, you have to keep washing your spectacle lenses or your contact lenses, isn't it? Otherwise they become dusty. The aqueous humor naturally protects the eye lens and keeps it clean. It also creates the required pressure, so that the eyeball stays inflated, so that the eye lens and the cornea, all of them stay rigid and inflated. They just don't, become flaccid. They just don't become all baggy and saggy. They stay rigid and fit to work because of aqueous humor, which creates the required pressure. Yet another part of the eye is, of course, the retina. The retina is the back part of the eye, and it's the screen where the image is formed. The optic nerve, as you already know, is that part of the eye which sends the electrical signals generated by the retina to the brain. Another important fluid present in the eye, apart from aqueous humor, is vitreous humor. Vitreous humor is the fluid that's present between the eye lens and the retina. This portion of the eye. Again, the function of the vitreous humor is similar to that of the aqueous humor. It creates pressure and it makes sure that the eye is clean. This entire, ball that you see on your screen, this entire, ball which contains all of these parts of the eye is often called the eyeball. Understood? So the entire ball which contains all the parts of the eye is called the eyeball. Understood? So those were the parts of the eye. You must remember all these parts. You must also remember their functions. Sometimes, what happens is that despite the presence of aqueous humor, the eye lens becomes very dusty. You see, it's clean here and now it's become dusty. When the eye lens becomes very dusty and milky and sometimes even cloudy, the disease, that causes this dustiness is called cataract. So sometimes you must have heard that old people, they get cataract operations done. That is because the eye lens becomes milky and dusty, as people get old and as the age increases. This is a real eye lens, which has become milky and dusty. You can see all these white portions here. They represent, the eye lens which has become cloudy. So all this cloudiness is removed after an operation, and then the eye lens becomes clean again. Let's solve a problem now, now that we've studied so much about the eye. Consider the lens inside the human eye. When is the image distance greater? When the object distance is 35 centimeters or when it is 100 centimeters? When is the focal length greater? So what is happening in this question? You see, we are asked, when is the image distance greater? When the object is far away or when the object is near? In the first case, the object is 35 centimeters from the lens, and in the second case, it is 100 centimeters from the lens. In which case is the image distance greater? See, in either case, the image distance is the same. We had learned that the image distance in the case of an eye is always constant. The image distance is the distance between the lens and the retina, and that is always constant. The focal length of the eye lens varies in such a way that the image distance is constant. So the answer to the first part of the question is, when the object is at 35 centimeters and when it is at 100 centimeters, the image distance, the distance between the image and the lens, is constant. The second part of the question said, in which case is the focal length greater? Clearly, the power of the lens must be high, when the object is nearer, isn't it? After all, when the object is nearer, the rays coming at the lens are more diverged, isn't it? So the lens has to be very powerful to converge those rays in the given image distance, isn't it? However, when the object is far away, when it is 100 centimeters away, then the lens does not have to be that powerful. It can take its time and it can converge those rays coming from far off easily in the given image distance. So a more powerful lens is required, to converge rays coming from a nearer object. Now the greater the power, the lesser the focal length, isn't it? Focal length and power are inversely related. So the focal length of the eye lens is lesser when the object is nearer. Understood? Because its power must be greater when the object is nearer. So that's our answer. The focal length is lesser when the object is at 35 centimeters. Here's another problem. Which of the following statements is true? The iris regulates the focal length of the lens. The pupil regulates the amount of light entering the eye. The optic nerve transmits electric signals to the brain. The image is formed on the cornea. So 4 options are given to us, and we need to identify which of them is correct. Let's look at each option one by one, and let's try to find out which option is correct. The first option says the iris regulates the focal length of the lens. This option is clearly wrong. The ciliary muscles regulate the focal length of the lens. The iris regulates the opening of the pupil, isn't it? The pupil regulates the amount of light entering the eye. This option is correct. Clearly, it is the pupil that regulates the amount of light entering the eye. The third option said the optic nerve transmits electric signals to the brain. This option is correct. The light sensitive portion of the retina generates electric signals which are transmitted to the brain by the optic nerve. So this option is correct. The image is formed on the cornea. This option is wrong. The image is formed on the retina. The cornea is the portion of the eye through which light enters the eye, and it helps in refracting the light entering the eye, and helping it converge. So this option is wrong. So there you go. We've solved yet another problem. Let's proceed and now solve even yet another problem. The ability of the eye lens to change the focal length so that the image is always formed on the dash is called the dash. The dash causes the change in focal length of the lens. Well, this statement seems complicated. There are 3 blanks and we have to fill in the blanks. Let's take a look at the statement again. The ability of the eye lens to change the focal length so that the image is always formed on the retina is called the power of accommodation, isn't it? We had already learnt about it. We had learnt that the ability of the eye lens to change its focal length is called the power of accommodation, and this happens so that the image is always formed on the retina. The ciliary muscles cause this change in focal length of the lens, isn't it? We had also learned that these are the muscles situated above the lens and below the lens, and they expand and contract to change the focal length of the eye lens. So that's our answer. So there you go. These are some important facts about the eye that you must remember. Now there is a very interesting fact related to the eye which we haven't yet explored. You see, all of us have 2 eyes and not 1 eye. Why is that so? After all, light falls on the eye, an image is formed on the retina, and this image gets converted into electric signals and it is transmitted to the brain. So 1 eye also serves the same purpose. So why don't we have 1 large eye or 1 eye? Why do we have 2? There are quite some reasons for this. First reason is that scientists have found out that 1 eye can only give us 150-degree vision. This means, that if we had only 1 eye, then we could view, a total area left to right of 150 degrees. You can see that, isn't it? We won't study the proof here, but scientists have already proved it, that 1 eye can only give us 150 degrees of vision. However, with 2 eyes, we have 180 degrees of vision. Understood? Something like this. You must have seen, that even when you are looking straight, from the left eye you can slightly make out even things which are to your left. From the right eye you can make out things which are slightly to your right, isn't it? So even when you are looking straight, you still know what is to the left and what is to the right, isn't it? So to get this sort of 180-degree vision, we have 2 eyes instead of 1. Another interesting reason why we have 2 eyes is that faint objects can be seen clearly with 2 eyes. Scientists have found that out too. After all, who is it that interprets images? The brain, right? So when it gets feedback from 2 eyes, it can see objects more clearly compared to getting feedback from just 1 eye. In fact, it has been found out that brain combines the images, the image sent by the left eye and the image sent by the right eye, to form a combined clear image, that we see. You must have seen that we don't see 2 images, isn't it? We see just 1 image, but the left eye forms a different image and the right eye forms a different image. Here you can see that if you look at this whale, the left eye and the right eyes are slightly seeing different things. The left eye is seeing the block to the right, while the right eye is seeing the block to the left. But the brain combines these images and forms one final image, and this image is the most accurate perception of reality. Understood? So having 2 eyes helps us do this. This ability of the brain to combine 2 images into 1 image is called stereopsis. Understood? Stereopsis is the ability of the brain to combine the left eye's image and the right eye's image so that we see one complete image, which gives us a better perception of reality. So you must remember this term, stereopsis. There you go. So there, we have studied in detail about how the eye works, how light enters the eye, where the image is formed, and we have also studied about different parts of the eye. Let's now move on and study the next chapter.